加一个东西。
And I'm very encouraged by the way that we worship the first 2 sessions.
特别是从我刚才诗歌里这个感动。
And I know that a lot of times in our Chinese churches we struggle a little bit with how we approach worship.
有时候我们可能在讲中文的教会里怎么样敬拜，会有一些挣扎问题。
Because we try to balance between the Mandarin worship and the English worship.
我们想在中英两个语言里找到一个平衡。
And there are certain ways that we worship in the Chinese way. There are certain ways we worship in the English way.
或许中文崇拜和英文崇拜程序都有点不同。
And so a lot of times we end up trying to compromise.
所以有时候我们在一起的时候，就要两个都要做一些妥协。
And so we sort of worship one way and we sort of worship another way.
那么我们最后结果就是，我们也遵循了一些这个方面，也遵循了一些那个语言方面的敬拜。
I have to ask you, is that the way the Bible tells us to worship?
这是我告诉我们这种应该的敬拜吗？
We sort of worship?
还是就是仅仅是敬拜？
Yeah, I don't think so. We're not going to do this here today, but you know, one of the stories about David was how he was going down the streets worshiping God in his underwear.
其实圣经里有一段，他提到大卫他怎么样敬拜，他的短裤的那种情形啊。
I mentioned that one time in our youth service, and one of my students stopped me and she said, "Pastor Victor, no, please, no."
有一次那个我们敬拜的时候，有一个年轻人就说啊，不要这样敬拜，不要这样。
But I want to encourage you, if you know the occasion calls for us to worship the Chinese or the Mandarin way, then we really need to do it to an extreme.
所以，其实我也给大家做一个布造一个挑战，就是说，当神让用两种语言一起敬拜的时候呢，我们应该做的最好。
And if the occasion calls for us to worship in a more Western English fashion, then we need to do it all the way.
如果我们做这种西式的和英文的，我们就做的最好一点。
You know, don't be afraid of offending each other.
不要害怕说对方不满意。
Because when we compromise, we end up worshiping God like this.
如果我们做妥协的时候，我们会减少我们敬拜的这种能力。
And God deserves our worship like this.
神是值得最大的敬拜的。
Okay, so you know, I've enjoyed the worship here, and I can feel that you know coming from all of you.
所以这我是刚才的一点感受。
And I want to encourage you to continue in that.
所以我也让你们鼓励你们继续。
And so, you know, like if those of us brought up in the Western culture, and mostly students here, if the worship gets to the point where we're doing a little bit of, you know, and it makes some of us older folks feel a little uncomfortable, that's okay.
所以当我们年轻人在西式文化下长大，如果你敬拜演唱到一定程度，可能非常高兴鼓掌的时候，可能我们其他的年长可能也会跟着一起。
And if the Mandarin worship, you know, the style, the culture, it becomes a little overwhelming to those of us in the Western side, and we're getting uncomfortable. God bless you.
所以，当我们在这种文化长大的，我们比较保守的，我们去敬拜的时候，如果感让这个年轻人感觉不舒服呢，神会保守我。
Because sometimes when we're worshiping God in an extreme way, it's going to make some people uncomfortable.
当我们用非常极端的方式来敬拜神的时候，可能会造成一些其他人不舒服。
But I think it's better that we're a little uncomfortable rather than God not receiving the glory that He deserves.
但我相信，即使我们有不舒服，但神的名应该是被高举的。
All right, so that's added. No charge for that one. Okay, let's see. Are we going to get this ready this morning? I see. Oh, yes. Thank you. Very good. Okay. So this morning we're going to talk about shadows. And this is from Psalm 23. And you have Psalm 23?
Yeah.
Okay. So let me read that in English first. Psalm 23 is Psalm of David. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not be in want. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside quiet waters. He restores my soul. He guides me in paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil. My cup overflows. Surely goodness and love will follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever.
诗篇20篇3篇，耶和华是我牧者，耶和华是我的牧者，我必不致缺乏。他使我躺卧在青草地上，连我在可安歇的水边。他使我的灵魂苏醒，用为自己的名引导我走义路。我虽然行过死荫的幽谷，也不怕遭害，因为你与我同在。你的杖、你的竿都安慰我。在我敌人面前，你为我摆设筵席，你用油膏了我的头，使我的福杯满溢。我一生一世必有恩惠慈爱随着我，我且要住在耶和华的殿中，直到永远。
Hey Lord, we give you thanks for this psalm.
谢谢你，主给我们诗篇。
And we know that David may have been out in the fields as he wrote this psalm.
我们可能看到大卫在写这个诗篇的时候，可能是在野外的草地上。
And as he exalted you as his shepherd, we exalt you today.
看你像一个牧羊人，像今天我们感受到的一样。
And we pray that this word will speak to us in the dark times that we might experience in life.
也求主能够在我们感觉生命黑暗的时候，你对我说话。
And we pray this in Jesus' name.
奉主耶稣的名祷告。
Amen. All right, today, this morning, and tonight, we're going to talk about two experiences of darkness that we would have in life.
我们今明两天会讨论一下两种黑暗的方式。
And so this morning, the type of darkness I want us to think about are shadows.
今天我们可能要讨论一下阴影。
Shadows are an indication of a darkness that is thrust upon us.
阴影就像有时候像突然像黑暗一样临到我们。
In most cases, if we see a shadow in life, it's not something that we create.
这个阴影不是我们自己造成的。
I didn't see any of you walking to breakfast this morning and say to yourself, "Oh, it's a little warm out here. I'm going to make a shadow."
所以，我们早晨来到这个时候，我们看到这里可能有点热，我们就遮一个阴影遮一下。
That doesn't make any sense.
不合道理。
Shadows are experiences of darkness that are thrust upon us.
那么这个阴影就像这个黑暗会突然临到我们。
Back in 2002, I was experiencing something with my right eye.
2002年的时候，我的右眼出了一些问题。
I started noticing that the vision on my right side was a little cloudy.
我的右眼看东西都很模糊。
And at first I thought maybe my wife and I mixed up our contact lenses.
我想让我的太太给我弄一下隐形眼镜。
I said, oh, I'll try hers on.
试试她。
But you know, that wasn't it.
但不是。
So, make a long story short, I went to the doctor.
后来我去看了医生。
And they said, wow, you can't see out of your right eye.
他说：“哎呀，你用右眼实在是看不见东西了。”
I don't know if any of you are doctors in here, but I thought to myself, that's what I told you.
是的，好像这就是我的感受。我跟他讲。
So they determined that I had a pituitary tumor.
他说长了一种肿瘤在眼睛。
And they said there was a lump sitting on my pituitary gland.
就长在这个眼的地方。
And it was pushing on the optic nerve.
那么压迫了神经，
and that's what was causing the cloudiness.
所以就看很模糊，看东西。
And so they removed the tumor.
他们后来摘除了那个肿瘤。
The way they did this was not in scientific terms, but they basically stuck a straw up my nose and sucked it out.
实际上是用一个吸管放在那个鼻孔里，吸了出来。
Are we okay? I should have warned you before I did that.
年轻人对这个有点受不了啊。
Yeah, it sounds gross, but they said the way they used to do it, they used to cut the person's upper lip, and they would lift up your face, and they, oh, there it is. And they would,
虽然听起来很恶心，但是如果用传统的方法，他们要割掉嘴唇，然后掀起这个上面的上颚，才能看到那个肿瘤。
But you know, when I went in for the initial examination, they did what they call an MRI.
那么当一开始检查的时候，他们用一种 MRI 这个照影。
And when I went back to get the results of the MRI, one of the terms that the doctor used to tell me that there was a tumor was, he said, there's a shadow showing up.
那么当时做完 MRI 之后呢，当医生告诉我这个情况的时候，他说你不是说他没有这种肿瘤这个事，他说你有一个阴影。
Something that was blocking the rays from coming in, through my pituitary.
那么就是阻挡这个过往的进步。
So shadows are blockages that prevent light from coming through.
那么所以阴影就是说有东西阻挡住了光而不能进入。
And again, we normally don't put them there; they're thrust upon us.
所以我们平常是没有的，他们只是突然临到了。
Yeah, there's nothing we've done to bring it about, and we have no power to get rid of it.
虽然我们不想要，但是我们说我没有能力能够去掉。
The biggest question we ask about shadows that occur in our lives is, why me?
当我们受到这种阴影的攻击的时候，我们可能说为什么是我？
And shadows can be very intimidating and threatening upon us.
那么这个阴影可能造成我们非常胆怯，让我们非常害怕。
I want us to see from Psalm 23 this morning that shadows are only a partial representation of the truth.
那么我们今天看诗篇23篇呢，我们就看到其实阴影仅仅是一部分，这个事实中的一部分。
When we experience a shadow, when we see a shadow, it can be intimidating, but it is not the entire truth.
虽然我们会很害怕，但这并不是所有的全部。
All right, so what we want to see here is how we need to respond to these shadows when they appear in our lives.
那么一旦发生在我们生命中，我们应该怎么样对付呢？
And I believe Psalm 23 describes for us 3 traits of shadows.
那么在这个诗篇23篇里提到了3种不同的这个阴影。
And so the first one here, the causes of shadows are tricky.
那么引起原因是很复杂的。
There should be. The graphic doesn't show up? No. This is the problem with technology.
现在技术有些。
Oh, yeah, anyway. The causes are tricky.
引起的原因比较复杂。
And so in verses 1 to 3 here, David describes what it is like to have the Lord as our shepherd.
那么在第1节提到耶和华是我们的牧者，
And these are good things that David is describing.
这是非常美好的，对不对？
He says that the Lord is my shepherd.
他写到耶和华是我的牧者，
And he describes what that means.
他描述了这个情景，
He says we shall not be in want
我们不至于缺乏，
because the Lord provides everything for us as our shepherd.
因为神作为牧者已经为我们预备了一切，
We can lie down in green pastures.
我们可以躺卧在青草地上。
When we were driving up yesterday, we were talking about the drought in California.
昨天我们来的路上，我们提到了加州的这个干旱。
And a few years ago, everybody's front lawns were brown.
那么很多时候干旱的时候，草都变成黄色。
And the government was trying to tell us brown is beautiful.
政府说我们相信，黄色其实白色是很好看的。
Typical California politicians.
加州政客的这个。
But I look at my front lawn, this is not beautiful.
我们觉得并不好看。
But when you have lush green grass, it invites you to lie down in those green pastures.
所以当我们看到绿色的草绿色的草坪的时候，我们真的愿意躺下。
It says, He leads us beside still waters.
他带领我们到可安歇的水边。
You know, a peaceful existence.
那里非常安静。
And then it says He restores our souls.
他使我们的灵魂苏醒。
And finally, He leads us in paths of righteousness.
为自己的名引导我们走义路。
Those are all wonderful things that God provides for us.
这些都是神给我们预备美好的东西。
And when we're experiencing God, you know, we get all of those things.
那么我们得到的时候，我们正在经历神。
Now it's interesting that the Bible will often talk about people, talk about followers of God, followers of Jesus as being sheep.
那么在圣经里经常把跟随神的人比喻成羊。
Any of you have dogs as pets? Okay.
可能有些人在这儿有宠物吗？
Any of you have cats as
有
pets?
猫养猫的。
Okay. Any of you have goldfish? Used to. Okay, a few. Okay, how many of you have sheep as pets?
绵羊吗？
Nobody has. We have one? You do? Okay. Yeah, none of us have sheep as pets.
没有人养绵羊做宠物。
You know why?
为什么？
Sheep are stupid.
绵羊真的很蠢。
You see, when it says the Lord is my shepherd, it means the shepherd has to lead them to grass that they can eat.
所以这地方提到，其实要牧者带领他们才能够有草吃。
He has to lead them to still waters.
他们还要带领他们去安歇的水边。
Because otherwise, all the sheep do is they stand there.
如果没有带领，那么绵羊就待在那儿。
They're among the dumbest animals on earth.
所以他们是最蠢的动物。
Any of you ever been around sheep?
大家见过绵羊？
How do they smell?
闻起来怎么样？
They reek. You know, they smell awful.
实在不怎么样。
It's a perfect description of us.
所以这是我们每个人的在神面前的那种形象。
Because, you know, in our spiritual state, we're stupid.
那么在神面前，我们可能是很蠢的。
And the dumb things that we do, the sin that we commit, makes us smell.
我们所犯的罪，让我们真的是像羊一样散发出臭味。
And so when David describes us as sheep, he's absolutely right.
所以大卫说我们像羊的时候，真的是非常比喻非常恰当。
But you see, as sheep, when we see the shepherd, we can be confident.
所以当羊看到牧羊人的时候，他会变得非常的自信。
When we see the Lord as our shepherd, we don't worry.
所以当我们看到神是我们的牧者的时候，我们不再担心，
Because God is going to supply for all that we need.
因为他会供应我们一切。
So the question here, the tricky part is, then why am I experiencing darkness?
那么这里有个问题，为什么我会经历这些黑暗？
You know, why is it that if the Lord is my shepherd and all these things are given to me, why am I experiencing darkness?
既然神是我们的牧者，为什么我们还突然会经历这些黑暗的时刻？
But we need to read these verses carefully and to see not only what is here in the verses, but what is not here.
所以我们要认真的读一段这些经文，然后看看这里有写到的，还有没有提到的。
It doesn't say, the Lord is my shepherd when I have enough money.
没有说我很有钱的时候他是我的牧者。
It doesn't say, the Lord is my shepherd when my job is going well or my grades are high.
这里没有提到当我工作很稳定，我的工资挣得很高的时候，神是我的牧者。
It doesn't say the Lord is my shepherd when I am happy.
这样也没有提到当我高兴的时候，神是我的牧者。
It says at all times, in all circumstances, in everything that happens, the Lord is my shepherd.
而是在所有的情景下，在所有的处境中，神是我的牧者。
You know, do you think things go well for sheep all the time?
如果这个绵羊一切都好的话，
You know, David tells stories about fighting off lions and bears.
那么大卫他还跟这些狮子和熊保护打架。
He talked about fighting off dangers, things that threaten the lives of the sheep.
那么这些动物会影响到绵羊的生命。
The sheep are not always at ease. There are going to be times of darkness.
所以并不是所有的都是安逸的时光，也有黑暗的时刻。
You see, the Lord is watching over us, even in those moments of darkness.
所以即使在黑暗的时候，神也是在看顾我们。
But see, the causes are tricky.
这个原因很复杂。
Did I do something to produce the pituitary tumor?
我做什么？我有没有预防这个肿瘤呢？
Not that I know of.
我并没有。
I even asked the doctors,
我问了一下医生，
did I eat something wrong?
是因为吃了什么不好的东西吗？
Did I drink too much coffee?
是喝了很多咖啡吗？
Did I study too hard when I was in school?
我学习太努力了吗？
I wish he had said yes to that.
希望他这么讲。
But he said, no, it just happens.
他说不是，就发生了。
And what happens when we lose our job?
当我们换工作的时候会怎么样呢？
You know, there's talk now of a possible recession.
现在有人在讨论，因为是一个经济衰退。
Did any of us do something to initiate a recession?
是因为大家做了什么引起了衰退吗？
If you did, we all want to talk to you.
如果是你造成的，我真想跟你讲话。
You see, those are things that just happen to us.
所以这些事情可能就发生了。
Sometimes when we enter into darkness, we start thinking, I sinned against God.
有时候我们进入黑暗的时候，可能说，可能因为我们犯了罪，
And I did something that made God mad at me.
我做错了什么事，然后神在惩罚我，
And that's why He's bringing this darkness upon me.
所以他给我带来这种黑暗。
But that's not always the case.
其实并不是都是这样，
The causes, foreshadows are tricky.
所以这个真的是很复杂的原因。
And sometimes we don't know why they come.
有时候我们并不知道为什么。
All right, next one that you already saw. Yes, please. Okay. Yeah, coping can be difficult.
第二个就是处理起来可能会比较困难。
You know, this is a wonderful song.
这是一个很美好的诗篇。
And when I was growing up in Sunday school, it was one of the psalms that they asked us to memorize.
那么我在上 Sunday School 的时候呢，就是说我愿意甚至把它背下来。
It may be one of the most well-known passages in Scripture in the entire world.
可能这个诗篇23篇也是世界上最著名的一个诗篇。
Even our non-Christian friends will be familiar somewhat with Psalm 23.
甚至很多非基督徒也非常熟悉这个经文。
Because it is a comforting psalm that speaks to us.
因为在这个23篇里有很多安慰我们的话语。
But right in the middle of the psalm, here in verse 4,
但是在中间第4节。
David says, even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death.
提到我虽然行过死荫的幽谷。
And notice the wording there. It doesn't say I'm walking through death. It says I walk through the valley of the shadow of death.
这里他并没有说我走过死亡，而是说我走过死荫的幽谷。
In other words, death is lurking. Death is near or threatening.
就是说死亡可能离我们非常的近。
We're not dying, but we can sense that it's threatening upon us.
虽然我们没有死，但是我们可以嗅到这种死亡的气息。
So you know what happens when a shadow appears?
那么在这个死荫临到的时候，我们会发生什么呢？
Now let me contrast a little bit. What's the difference between a shadow and a shade?
我们想比较一下这个阴影和那个阴影。
Sorry. Okay, when you're outside and it's hot,
当你在外面很热的时候，
and you find a big tree,
你找一棵大树，
and it's cooler under the tree.
所以在树下面会很凉。
Yes, we want to go there.
所以我们想在树下乘凉。
You see, that's a shade.
所以那个是树荫。
Last week at San Jose State, we had our tables out for the first week of school.
所以我们第一个星期开学的时候，下山一组，我们会在支一个树窝子在树荫底下。
And so all the different organizations were up and down the main walkway of San Jose State.
所以我们都在那个大学里面，都在那个乘凉晚上。
And somebody told me that Crew, Campus Crusade for Christ, that they were not in their assigned spot.
有一个校园施工，他们并没有在那儿安排地方。
And I found Campus Crusade all the way down in the end.
所以他们会排在最后。
You know where they were? They were in the shade.
在树荫底下。
The shade happened to be next to a fountain.
在一个水池的旁边。
And I went over to see them.
我去看他们。
And I didn't have a thermometer with me, but I'm guessing it was 5 to 10 degrees cooler where they were than where we were.
但是我们又在温度计，但应该比我们那儿至少2到5到6度。
And where's Wesley? Yeah, you know what I said to them? I said, Crew, you're not as dumb as you look. No, they were very smart to be there in the shade. You see, a shade is something that we welcome.
所以树荫呢，我们是比较希望得到。
A shade protects us.
树荫其实可以保护我们。
But see, a shadow is different.
阴影却不一样。
A shadow is threatening.
阴影是有威胁的。
You ever seen any of those pictures where, like the sun is very low at the end of the day?
你们看到一个照片呢，那个太阳快下山的时候。
And there might be a 3 or 4-year-old child standing in the sun.
3、4岁是个小孩站在那里。
And the sun, because of the angle coming on the child, the shadow is long, right?
所以因为在太阳落山的时候，所以这个照在他这个小孩的身影会非常长。
And the child will look at his or her shadow, and then they'll say, "Mom, look how tall I am."
所以小孩看到自己的这个身影以后，就说：“哎呀，你看妈，我长得多高啊！”
And the mother will say, "You stupid kid, that's just your shadow."
然后那时候孩子别犯傻了，那就是你的。
You see, it's not a true representation.
所以那不是一个真正的，
It's a partial truth.
只是一部分正确的。
Now, see, a child is not very intimidating.
小孩并不害怕。
But what if it's your puppy?
那么如果是你的宠物呢？
And the puppy happens to put up its claws.
张起它的爪子来。
And you look at the shadow, and the claws are like that long.
然后再看那个影子会非常长的话。
And you know, you ask, where's that monster dog?
会非常害怕，是一个非常吓人的狗。
It's down here. It's not a true representation.
所以这个阴影有时候并不是真实的。
But see, when David describes it here, walking through the valley of the shadow of death, it's intimidating upon us.
所以大卫提到走过死荫的幽谷是非常吓人的。
So what do shadows do to us?
那么这些阴影会对我们造成什么呢？
a shadow becomes a distraction.
会使我们分散精力。
There may be other things going on in our lives that are wonderful,
或许我们身边发生很多美好的事情，
that would encourage us.
可以鼓励我们。
But because we have this shadow in our life, it distracts us.
有了阴影，却分散了我们的注意力，
And then it causes a distortion.
使我们扭曲。
Because we begin to focus upon the shadow and we don't notice the other things that God is doing.
有时候我们把神情都专注在这个阴影上面，而不是事情本身，我们就忘了神的存在。
It's easy for us to become fearful because of the shadows that we do.
就让我们感到非常的害怕，因为那些阴影。
Now the shadow can turn out to be nothing,
阴影有时候可能会什么并没有发生，
or it could be an indication of something much bigger.
或许预示着更大的事情。
Now the pituitary tumor,
回到这个肿瘤，
they asked me to do MRI exams every 5 years.
他们要求我每5年做一次 MRI。
And so I did it every 5 years, and time after time after time, they said, okay, everything's clear, your head is empty.
然后每次做完，然后脑里面空的。
Tell me something I don't know. No, but they said, yeah, there's nothing there.
说没有长仔细的肿瘤。
And then in 2017, my doctor called me
2017年，我的医生给我打电话，
and said, no, there's something there again.
他说又长了一个小肿瘤，
And it wasn't as big as the last time.
并不如上一次那么大。
But they said, well, you could leave it there or we can treat it.
你可以让它再留在那儿长，或者是我们现在就可以摘掉。
I said, no, let's treat it.
我说现在就摘掉。
And so they didn't go up my nostril again.
这一次没有用上次那个方法。
Are we ready? Okay, this time it's very simple. They did radiation.
他们用放射照。
So I had to lay on this table, and the hardest part was they put a mask over me.
这个我躺在这个桌子上，然后他们给我一个面具。
And it's a molded mask. A molded.
Modern。怎么形容？我形容。
Yeah, thank you. And when I was lying there, this mask is clamped down on my face.
就躺在那时候，这个面具就罩在我的脸上。
And then the technician came into the room and said, "Oh, we're a little bit off target."
放这个地方有点错误。
And they said, "Can you move your head a little to the upper right?"
我说那可不可以头直一下？
And so this mask is clamped down on me.
但是这个面具完全的罩着我的脸，
So I'm going,
所以我使劲动。
And they said, "Oh, great, that's perfect." So I said, "Really? Okay."
非常好，非常好，不要动。
So they did about 20 minutes of radiation for 3 days.
他们每天给我照20分钟，照了3天。
And the first day was okay. The second day was okay. The third day, I felt kind of tired.
第1天还好，第2天也还好，到第3天的时候，我感觉非常疲劳。
After it was done, I was going to go home. I was going to go to the gym.
我没有回家，我去了这个锻炼健身房。
When I got home, I go, it's okay. We'll wait till tomorrow.
我明天再去吧。
But they told me that the radiation cleared it all up.
他们说后来放射非常成功。
And just a couple weeks ago, I went back for another MRI.
那么几个星期以后，我又回去做了一个 MRI。
And they told me once again, your head is empty.
又告诉我你脑子是空的。
And so, when we have these shadows that appear in life, sometimes they can turn out to be relatively nothing.
所以有时候阴影虽然出现，但是它们可能对没有造成任何后果。
But it could be an indication of a greater danger.
但是也有可能预示着更大的危险。
I read the report from the most recent MRI.
我最近看了一个最近的 MRI 的报告，
And they said something about a mass appearing.
他们看到一个大的东西。
And I got a little concerned. I said, oh, a mass appearing, what does that mean?
他就想知道为什么这么大的东西。
And when I got there, I asked the surgeon about it. He said, oh, no, that's just sinus kind of stuff. Don't worry about it.
他说不要担心，我问了一下医生，
It could be allergies or whatever, no concern.
可能是过敏造成的。
And so I was so glad to hear that there's nothing there now.
很高兴现在是什么都没有了。
But it's impossible for us to determine why shadows come upon us in life.
所以我们很重要的是我们要知道为什么这些阴影会临到我们。
Now, I've mentioned this before, I'm going to mention it now, I'll probably mention it a few more times. But when you look at the shadowy times in Scripture, those are the times when God reveals Himself the most.
我以前说过，我将来也会很多次强调，就当我们看到这个经文讲到黑暗的时候，这是神看入我们最密切的时候。
Someone mentioned this in our small group discussion last night.
昨天晚上小组讨论的时候，有提到一个问题。
But remember those students I was telling you about talking to their atheist friend?
昨天提到一些学生，他们提到跟无神论者的一些对话。
You know, God is so good, I'm happy all the time.
神是好的，我们一直都很高兴。
I get straight A's every day, I don't study anymore.
全 A， 不用学了。
You know, if our lives were like that all the time, why would we have any need for God?
那么，如果我们的生活都是这样的话，我们会怎么样呢？
If we woke up every morning and got out of bed and go, oh, this is a wonderful day. I'm so glad I'm alive today.
那么我们早晨醒来的时候，我们就说美好的一天，我很高兴我还活着。
Why would we need God?
我们这还需要什么？
When we wake up in the morning, I wonder if I'm still going to have a job today.
我早晨醒来的时候，我可能会问自己，今天还会有一个工作吗？
I wonder what the doctor's going to say when I go in to see him today.
我去看医生的时候，医生会告诉我一个什么新的消息？
What if I don't pass my AP exam?
那么我如果 AP 课过不了怎么办？
When we wake up with those thoughts, we know we need God.
当我们醒来会想起这些问题的时候，我们知道我们还需要什么。
And it's in those desperate, dark, shadowy moments of life when we experience God the most deeply.
所以，当我们经历这些最灰暗的这些幽谷的时候，是我们最需要神的时候。
You know, when we go through those dark times, we don't want to hear people give us those Christian cliches.
我们经历一些黑暗的时候，不需要基督给我们有些基督的建议。
You know, when I was going through seminary and we took the Christian counseling classes, we all wanted to hear from our professor the right words that you say to a person when they're in trouble.
所以，当我去神学院学习这个心理咨询这种建议的时候呢，我们就是说，想让教授告诉我们怎么样告诉人最好的话才能安慰。
And so, you know, we have all these Christian cliches, these sayings that we give.
我们有很多这个圣经里面的至理名言。
When you're going through a dark moment, and maybe there's a medical issue that you're experiencing.
当你经历黑暗的时候，或许是你经历什么病症，
And someone comes to visit you,
有人来看你，
and they say, I know exactly how you feel.
告诉你说，我知道你现在正在经历身体经历什么。
Now that's a well-intentioned statement.
这个是非常难，这个其实不好说的。
It sounds like the right thing to say.
好像是说一个安慰的话，
But ask yourself, do you really know exactly how they feel?
但是你问问你自己，你 真的知道这些病人所经历的吗？
You know, we'll say, oh, I went through the same thing 3 years ago. I know exactly how you feel.
你可能说我3年前也得了同样的病，我知道你在感觉什么。
But even if you went through the same issue, you're not that person.
即使你经历同样的病症问题，但是你不是他那个人在经历。
And the feelings that you had may not be the same feelings that they're experiencing.
你病的经历并不一定是这个人现在经历的。
So I know we have good intentions, but I'm not sure it really helps to say, I know exactly how you feel.
所以好的出发点并不一定能够带来安慰。
And what if you have someone who's lost their job?
如果有人丢了工作怎么办呢？
What do you say to them?
怎么跟他讲呢？
Somebody might say, don't worry, things will get better.
可能说别太担心，会有转机的。
That's well-intentioned.
我这是很好的一个动机。
But how do you know things will get better?
但你怎么会知道会变好呢？
We have some people in Silicon Valley who lost their jobs during the last bust.
那么我们在硅谷有些人丢了工作。
When all the dot-coms and all the high-tech businesses just went down.
很多那个高科技公司关门了。
And things are much better now.
现在有好一些。
But I was talking to a gentleman in our church, and he said, we have some people in our congregation who have not had steady jobs for the last 15 years.
有些我跟我的教会会友聊天，他们说有些人15年没有工作。
I mean, they've been working as contractors.
他们只是一个合同工。
But it's not the same thing as having a permanent position.
跟那种全职工作是不一样的。
They're doing okay.
他们可以活着。
But things really never got better.
但是并没有变得更好。
So, how do we know that? How do we know things are going to get better?
那么我们怎么知道事情会变得更好呢？
So it took me a long time. I didn't learn in seminary the right words to say when someone is in trouble.
所以我学了很多时间，我才学到，在神学院里没有学到的东西。
When I went to visit people in the hospital, I never knew what to say.
我在去医院看一些病人的时候，我不知道该怎么讲话。
And it was maybe 5, 7 years ago I finally figured it out.
那5到7年前，我终于知道该怎么讲。
When you go to visit a person who's experiencing a shadow in life, you don't say anything.
当你去看一个人正在经历黑暗的时刻的时候，你不要讲太多。
You simply tell them, I'm here with you.
你只要告诉他们，我和你在一起。
Tell me what's going on.
跟他们讲所发生的一切，
Tell me how you're feeling.
讲出你自己的感受，
Tell me how I can pray for you.
讲出你会为他们祷告。
You let them talk to you.
让他们跟你讲话，
You don't have to give any wise words to them.
你不用跟他们讲什么至理名言。
Because do you notice that's what God does here?
这就是神在这里所做的。
When it says the Lord is my shepherd,
神是我们的牧者，
it doesn't say that the shepherd goes up to the sheep
他并没有讲牧者到羊的面前，
and it doesn't say, you stupid sheep,
说你这是蠢羊，
here's what you ought to do.
你要这么做，
Stop making all that noise.
别乱叫，
Go take a bath.
去冲一个澡，
You need to straighten your life out.
你好好整理一下你的生活。
See, the Lord doesn't say anything.
神并没有讲这些。
Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. What does it say? Because God talked to me. Because God gave me advice.
他说，虽然走过阴谷的时候，神并没有说神跟我说话，或者神给我们什么好的建议。
No, my Bible doesn't say that.
我的圣经上没有这么讲，
It says, for you are with me.
但是说你与我同在。
Have you ever noticed how much that comes up in Scripture?
你知道这个有多重要吗？
One of the names for Jesus is Emmanuel.
耶稣的一个名字就是与神与我们同在。
God with us.
Emmanuel 神与我们同在。
See, when we're walking through the valley of the shadow of death,
所以当我们走过死荫的幽谷的时候，
that's all we need.
这是我们所需要的。
To hear God say to us, I am with you.
神跟我们说，他与我们同在。
Okay, last one.
最后一面，
Conquering our shadows can be time-consuming.
那么战胜这个有可能要花很多时间。
Now, in the verses that follow, the Lord continues to show Himself faithful.
那么接下来更再一次展示他的信实。
The picture that is given to us in verses 5 and 6 shows us victory.
那么在第5到第6节里面，其实给我们一个胜利的画面。
It says, "A table prepared in the presence of my enemies."
在敌人面前摆设了筵席。
In those days, that's how a conquering army would often celebrate their victory.
这在以前是征服者经常做的一个庆祝仪式。
They would have a celebration feast with the enemy captured army watching it.
他们在被他们抓住的敌人面前摆设筵席。
I know it sounds kind of mean, but that's what they did.
虽然不太好，但确实他们这么做的。
And then it says, "My head is anointed with oil.
你用油膏了我的头，
My cup overflows.
我的福杯满溢，
There's an abundance.
有很多丰盛，
There is plenty."
满足。
It shows us that there is a victory that God has given to us.
神赐给我们这些胜利，
There are also signs of peace.
也有平安在里面。
David talks about goodness and mercy.
讲到神的宽恕，神的恩惠，
And he says, "Dwelling in the house of the Lord forever."
讲到住在神的殿中直到永远。
So there's a picture of eternal peace.
所以这有永远的这种平安。
It describes a victory that we have, a time of conquest.
所以我们随着时光的流逝，我们的胜利。
And you see, peace is the norm that we're looking for.
那么平安是我们所追求的。
There's very few of us who start each day looking for a fight.
我们很少有人早上起来就说要找人打架。
I seriously doubt if most of us go to work every day and say, "Okay, let me see who I can argue with."
我们很少有人说我们今天要去工作了，就说我们要找一个人吵一吵。
You know, that doesn't make sense.
不合道，不合情理。
You know, we want to collaborate.
我们要协作，
We want to work on a project together.
我们一起做事情，
We want to have a result with each other.
我们要一起完成。
You see, peace is the norm that we're looking for.
所以我们每个人都在追求这个平安。
See, true peace comes from seeking after God, seeking for restoration, seeking for healing.
所以真正的平安，只有我们在追寻神的时候，追寻躺在神的看顾之中，我们才会得到。
You see, it's time-consuming because we need to work at it.
所以这里面说要花一些时间，因为我们需要做一些工作。
See, there's a false peace that we can achieve.
有一些平安我们可以得到，
We can achieve a false peace by avoiding conflict
我们可以强迫做一些事情，比如说不跟人争吵，
and just trying to imagine that things are okay or things are better.
我们可以想象任何事情都还好。
But when we pretend, there's not a real result.
所以我们这个仅仅是想象的时候，并没有真实的结果。
Sometimes we want to go back to old arguments that we've had,
有时候我们会想到以前吵过的架，
and we want to remind people, we want to remind our spouses of past sins that we've committed.
我们可能会想到以前所犯的罪，
But see, that doesn't bring about a real peace.
但这并没有带来真正的平安。
See, a peace is something we have to work at.
有些平安是要做一些事情、做一些工作得到的。
A true peace comes from asking God to intervene.
真正的平安是来自于神。
So you'll know that you're in the right place. You'll know that you're experiencing peace when you're dealing with bitterness.
那么你知道在神的在的时候，你会有平安。
And you're looking for a new healing in your life.
有时候你在寻找神的治愈。
You're actually working through a conflict.
有时候你可能会遇到一些冲突。
And then you offer forgiveness to others.
你会给他们带来宽恕。
But do you know how hard it is to forgive?
你知道宽恕人是多困难吗？
You know, I imagine there's a lot of our business schools who will actually teach against forgiveness.
你知道很多时候商学院会教我们不要宽恕别人。
They'll say, never back down.
不要后退。
Never say that you're wrong.
从来不要说你错了。
You see, when you offer forgiveness, it breaks through a lot of barriers.
但是当你宽恕别人的时候，你就冲破很多的障碍。
There's a gentleman out in the Bay Area who heads a company called VMware.
那么有一个人在旧金山那边开了一个公司。
And I was reading his biography.
我读了一下他的生平介绍。
And he said years ago, he came to a point in life, he was trying to decide if he should become a pastor or if he should become a businessman.
几年前他有一个选择是要做牧师呢，还是要做一个商人。
And at first he was convinced that he should quit his job in high tech and he should go to seminary and become a pastor.
所以当时他首先想到是要辞掉工作去神学院做一个牧师。
But he said he was doing his devotions one morning, reading through scripture, praying to God about this decision.
但有一天他做灵修祷告的时候，他读经文，然后向神祷告。
And he was convinced that God was leading him to start his own business.
他感受到神在让他开始一个新的公司。
Because the Lord was saying to him, if you start your business and you bring godly principles into the way that you run your business, into the way that you manage people, you can touch more people that way than you would as a pastor.
他就感受到神在跟他讲，如果你用神给你的这些原则来运营你的公司，神给你的这些准则和这些生活方式，你可能会影响更多的人。
I got to be careful with that.
我要小心。
Those of us who are pastors in the room, it doesn't mean we all quit our jobs.
在座的可能有很多牧师，我不是说鼓励你们都去辞掉牧师的工作。
Because that was something specific for him.
这个仅仅是神对他的一个呼召。
That's not something for everybody.
不是对每一个人。
But in his particular life, at that particular time, the Lord was instructing him to start his own business.
在他自己的生命，在他自己的那个时刻，神呼召他去做那件事情。
And he's done that. He started VMware.
那么他就开始了这个公司。
And I told you about my son last night, the one who's finishing physical therapy school.
昨天提到我有一个儿子做理疗的。
Before he started physical therapy school, he got licensed as a personal trainer.
那么他拿到了理疗的执照。
So my son likes to.
他喜欢做健身的。
And he got a job at VMware.
他就在那个公司里找到了工作。
And they have, this tells you about their company. They have their own gym.
还有他们自己的健身房。
The employees can go there to work out.
所以那些雇员可以去那儿去锻炼身体。
And they hire people like my son.
所以他们雇了我儿子。
So when you go in there to work out,
去那儿锻炼的时候呢
he says to them,
跟他们讲
dude, you suck.
你这个身体不怎么样
You're not doing that right.
没有做对
And, he teaches them techniques about exercise.
所以他教给他们怎么样正确的锻炼身体
But he told me that the atmosphere And the way the company is run is reflective of this man who started the company.
所以大师告诉我说，这个公司所运作的方式真的是反映出这个当时这个人的想法。
That he exercises biblical principles in the way he manages his company.
他把圣经的原则运用到这个公司的运营管理中。
And forgiveness and reconciliation is one of those qualities that comes through.
宽恕人是其中一个很重要的一个。
And so when we forgive each other, it's a powerful thing that happens in our relationships.
其实在我宽恕别人的时候，是一个非常大的一个非常有利的。
But it can take a long time, and we have to persevere.
但是要花很长时间。
A few years ago, one of my former youth group kids was telling me that he was getting married, and he wanted me to perform his wedding.
那么我以前带了一个年轻的一个学生，他要结婚。
And so we started the premarital counseling process.
所以我们有一个婚前的一个辅导。
And they were telling me that they have arguments.
他提到他们有一些争论。
And he said, well, we're having this argument, and I told her I'm sorry.
他说我告诉他了，我对不起。
And he said, I don't get it. She was still upset.
虽然我道歉了，但是他还是不原谅我。
I mean, how many times do I have to say I'm sorry?
我要说多少遍对不起呢？
I said, Mike, it's not just to say you're sorry.
我跟麦克说，你不仅仅要说对不起。
It's not a automatic button that you push and everything becomes happy again.
不是说你说了对不起，就好像按动了这个原谅这个阀。
I said, Mike, you have to sit there, you have to talk to your future wife.
你要跟他坐在一起，你要跟他讲话。
You have to ask questions.
你要问他一个问题。
You have to ask, what made you upset? What did I do?
我做错了什么？问那个未婚妻。
And you have to sit there and you have to listen to her.
你要坐在那里听他讲。
You have to let her talk.
让他说话。
You have to let her express everything that's on her heart.
你要让他表达出他心里所想的一切。
And I'm looking at his future wife.
我又跟那个我未婚妻说。
I said, isn't that right? Isn't that what you want from him?
是不是你想要的？是不是？对，是对。
And she's sitting there.
未婚妻当时就说：“对，你讲的太对了。”
And Mike goes, really?
是吗？
See, he thought I could say, I'm sorry, and that solves everything. I can go back and watch television now.
想，只要说了对不起，我就可以一切就结束了，我就可以继续看我电视了。
But you see, to achieve real, heartfelt, true forgiveness, it takes time.
所以你要真正得到宽恕、得到原谅，是要花很多时间。
See, in verses 5 and 6, when there's a table prepared for me in the presence of my enemies, that didn't just happen overnight.
所以在第5节提到的，在我的敌人面前摆设筵席，并不是说一夜之间可以完成的。
To get that kind of victory is something we need to work at and to persevere.
所以要得到这个胜利呢，其实我们要花一些时间。
So this morning, I want to invite us to look beyond the shadows that appear in life.
所以当今天早晨我鼓励大家，不要仅仅看我们眼前那些阴影。
To recognize that the Lord is saying, I am with you.
要意识到神在跟我们讲，我和你在一起。
And to know that shadows, in most cases, are just temporary.
而且我们知道，阴影仅仅是暂时的，大部分时间。
The fear that we feel is real.
我们所感受到的这种害怕是真的。
I don't want any of us ever to say to somebody, "Oh, it's just a shadow. It'll pass. Don't worry."
我不想让你们感受到是那个不是真实的，一切都会过去的。
Yeah, it is temporary.
是暂时的。
But the fear is real.
但是这个害怕当时是真的。
The shadow may seem ominous for right now.
那个阴影看起来很可怕。
But the Lord will lead us to a table of victory.
但是神会引领我去那个胜利的宴席。
And you know, there are some shadows that in some ways never disappear.
有时候这些阴影好像真的是没有走掉。
I told you about my wife's relative who has this cancer. He may only have weeks or months to live.
昨天提到我太太的一个同事，他得了癌症。
We're praying for his healing.
他可能只能活几个星期了，或几个月了。我们为他祷告。
We're praying for his salvation.
我们为他的救恩祷告。
But you know, we also recognize that death is lurking.
但是我们也意识到死亡是临近的。
You know, we would like to think that God is going to, miraculously heal Cam. And you know, we pray for that to happen.
我们为他祷告，能够医治。
But we know the shadow may never disappear.
但我们可能知道阴影可能永远走不掉。
But you know, even if that is the case, there is a way that God impacts our lives. He will impact the lives of Ken's family members.
虽然是这样，但是神他也会影响我们，影响那个病人的家属。
And they may experience a form of victory in the days that follow.
那么给他一些大卫所经历的。
See, we don't know why God acts in some cases, in other cases He doesn't.
有时候我们不知道，神为什么会让这些事情发生，但是就发生了。
We merely need to trust in God's sovereignty.
我们要相信神，
We trust in the fact that God loves Ken,
我们相信神也爱那个病人，
and we leave the results to God.
我们让神来决定，
And we wait to see how He will impact our lives and the lives of others.
看到他的生命会不会，还有别人会不会影响其他人。
And so as we finish this morning, I want us to think about the shadows.
今天早上我们要快要结束的时候呢，我们想想阴影这个问题。
You know, are you under a shadow today?
你现在正在经历一个阴影吗？
And I know a lot of times it's difficult for us to share.
有时候我们可能很难跟大家分享出来这个经历。
But as the Lord leads you, as we do small groups later today,
如果神引导你，我们待会儿在小组讨论的时候，
trust the Lord that He's given you good people around you.
相信神会安排他所要的在你旁边。
And maybe you can share about your shadow.
或许你可以分享你的一些感受，
And you can ask for prayer. You can ask for the Lord to be with you.
你可以要求祷告，要求神与你同在，
And pray that God may lead you.
神会安慰你。
All right, shall we pray?
一起祷告。
Father, we thank you for this promise.
主，我们谢谢你的信实，
In the dark times of life,
在黑暗的时刻，生命黑暗的时刻，
when shadows are thrust upon us,
当这种阴影突然临近我们的时候，
we didn't do anything to bring the shadow.
我虽然没有做什么，
We feel like we don't deserve the shadow.
没有做什么错事来带，虽然做错事，而且我们觉得我们不应该得到这些，
But the shadow is there.
但是这个阴影却是真实的。
But Lord God, more importantly, you are with us.
但是重要的是，神与我们同在。
You are present with us in the darkness.
你在黑暗中与我们同在。
You are present with us when we experience those shadows.
当经历这些阴影的时候，你与我们同在。
And even though we walk through the valley of the shadow of death,
当我们走过死荫的幽谷的时候，
we will fear no evil
我们不害怕，
because you are with us.
因为你与我们同在。
And your rod and your staff, the things that the signs that tell us that you are with us, encourages us.
你带来很多的信息和暗示，带领我们，你与我们同在。
So we thank you, Father, for your abiding presence.
谢谢天父，
Pray this in Jesus' name.
奉主耶稣基督的名祷告。
Amen.